Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Complete Your Portfolio Tool and Gather Evidence Orientation webinar for the Canadian Alliance of Dental Technology Regulators Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition Pathway Pilot. I will be using the acronyms CADTR for the Canadian Alliance of Dental Technology Regulators and PLAR for Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition. Today is October 6, 2025, and we are very glad to see you here. Before we start with introductions, let me quickly walk you through today's agenda. We will begin with welcome and introductions, about 5 minutes. Next, we will cover an introduction to CADTR, the PLAR pathway pilot and how it works, the pilot process, and the PLAR pathway pilot applicant results for about 20 minutes. Then we will move to an orientation to step 3, how to complete your portfolio and evidence grid. We will spend about 70 minutes on this item. During this session, we will also answer the questions you submitted before this webinar and walk through one sample evidence grid that has been completed. This will give you a clear idea of what is expected and how to complete your own evidence grid. And finally, we will open up for questions and answers. You'll have time to raise anything that is unclear or that you would like to discuss further. And with that, let's get started with our introductions. My name is Tabasam Eftekari. Many of you already know me. I've been the one sending you emails about this pilot project. I am one of the lead consultants at Construct Measures, working with my colleague Karen Katsia, and we have been contracted by CADTR to design and develop this pathway on their behalf. Joining us today, we are pleased to have Judy Rigby, the CADTR Board Chair, and also the Registrar and Chief Executive Officer of the College of Dental Technologists of Ontario. Unfortunately, our lead subject matter expert is not able to join us today due to an unexpected conflict. That said, we still want to make sure you get the benefit of their expertise. If you have content-specific questions during or after this webinar that require subject matter input, please send them to me by email. Once all questions are collected, we'll share them with the lead SMEs, and then we will send the responses to the entire group so everyone has the same information. To begin, I will now pass it over to Judy Rigby, who will set the context for today's session and share CADTR's perspective on this important project. Judy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tabasam. It is customary for us in this day and age to be able to provide a land acknowledgement. Since each of us are attending this meeting remotely today from different locations within Canada, I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples on whose traditional territories we all live and work. Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the lands and waters from where each of us is attending the meeting today. I know I don't have to pass to Tabasam to do the French, but I do want to add my own perspective on the land acknowledgement and how fitting it is today, especially welcoming several of you who may be international applicants, that have worked in the labs here in Canada, and you represent the diversity not only in Canada in the different provinces, but also diversity in the patients in the public that we will be serving as registered dental technologists. So thank you very much.
Okay, I will now read the acknowledgement in French. Puisque nous participons aujourd'hui à une réunion virtuelle à partir de nombreux endroits au Canada, j'aimerais reconnaître et manifester notre gratitude envers les peuples autochtones qui sont les intendants traditionnels des territoires, terres et rivières sur lesquels nous vivons et travaillons.
Thank you very much, Tabasam, again. So what is CADTR's role and mandate? So again, the CADTR itself is members that have come together they represent their provinces, but they sit on CADTR in order to discuss any issues, concerns, understand the environment legislatively, competencies that are changing that are not provincially like siloed, but really are important for all provinces. And we like to bring these to the table. So our mandate is to demonstrate leadership and accountability on matters which support the regulation of dental technology and protect the public interest in a consistent national approach. And for many, many years, CADTR was just that. CADTR was just coming together, talking about these relevant concerns. And then we evolved. And really, it was starting in 2017, we took on, and very well supported by the Government of Canada through the Foreign Credential Recognition Program, CADTR took on credential and assessment services as a separate function, but still under CADTR. And since 2017, we've developed a new set of national competencies, national entry to practice competencies, uh, looking at the programs that offer dental technology in Canada and going through a process of approving them. Some of you may have heard the word accreditation. It's similar, but it is different. So we approve these programs, and there are five programs in Canada that are approved dental technology programs. And we've been doing this. So as CADTR members, we've been doing this for 27 years together. And as I said, since 2017, we've taken on this additional function of credential and assessment services, which is separate from the board, original CADTR agenda. So our purpose is we have this unified regulatory voice for the profession. We've developed national standards, as I've said, national competencies, and we try to harmonize the pre-licensing requirements to support labor mobility. As CADTR, we don't take on the registration, the provincial registration, and every province is accountable for the registration procedures in their province. They're accountable to ensure that CADTR's credential and assessment services are legitimate, they are fair, they're transparent, they're objective, they're impartial. So there is an accountability by each provincial regulator for a CADTR to be providing these services in a certain manner. Uh, Again, the province, though, is on the hook for their own registration practices. So our functions, as it says on your slide deck, develop and manage licensing pathways, administer the entry to practice assessments, and also provide orientation and self-assessment support tools, which I hope you've been able to look at the CADTR website and take full advantage of those tools. So on to the next slide. So currently, we have three pathways to becoming an RDT. And as you can see, the approved program Canadian Education Pathway, which I just spoke about, there are the five programs. One is in Alberta, one is in BC, one is in Ontario, one is in Quebec, and one is actually in Manitoba, because even though they don't regulate dental technology in Manitoba, they do have a dental technology program. So these are the five approved programs. And those five approved programs, there was an education benchmark, it's called, that was conducted in the years of 2017 to 2020. And the purpose of that benchmark was to determine how do you set the benchmark for individuals coming in that have not gone through an approved program in Canada. So the second pathway is the profession-specific credential evaluation pathway. Now, they're more than likely already oral health professionals in another country. So they're internationally educated. They have a formal education in dental technology or another recognized oral health programs such as denturism, dentistry, dental hygiene, dental assistant. And because they've gone through a formal education, and they've more than likely come through a credential evaluation agency for two purposes. One is immigration. They also get a credential evaluation certificate that validates and verifies, authenticates their transcript from their home country, their home education system. And they also then have to have their home education institution provide CADTR with their transcript curriculum. But that cuts out a great majority of dental lab associates that are either working in dental labs in their home country or in Canada already in laboratories, have been working here for years, that have not had that opportunity to invest in that formal education. There are lots of reasons why they've not been able to do that. And so we, in 2024, received funding from the federal government in order to develop and pilot this new pathway called Prior Learning Assessment Recognition, PLAR. And this is for dental lab workers or dental lab associates with significant informal on-the-job experience. And some of that could be also some of that experience could also involve bits and pieces of formal education, right? You may have taken some courses in dental technology from one of the approved programs when it was offered, or you started the program but didn't complete the program years ago. So this pathway is really if you haven't completed your formal post-secondary education, and it's also though for internationally educated or non-approved program applicants who went through the PSCE route, but their curriculum could not demonstrate substantial equivalence to the approved program. So this is an alternate pathway. But today we know that all of you on this webinar today or this information session is not coming from that PSCE pathway. But you may have other colleagues that have that formal dental technology education. Please share that pathway with them so that they can contact CADTR and find out what their pathway will be. So how does PLAR work? Well, as I said, we got this significant funding to support this development and implementation from the federal government. They believe in CADTR. They know that we have proven ourselves through the first projects that we conducted, that we developed and we implemented. So they are what we call a trusted system partner. So with PLAR, you have to be able to demonstrate you've already done this. It's like I'm repeating myself, high school or equivalent. You've done the self-assessment. You've given us your work experience, your resume, things that you provided to your employers to get the job that you've landed now and previously, and a reference letter. There are some tweaks that we're going to make on the reference letters. Some of you provided reference letters that were signed by colleagues. But what we really need is, and we're not going backwards, but for future knowledge, when you're giving your evidence, the kind of attestation or reference letter that we will be asking for in future is from an RDT or a supervisor that, directly observed your work. And then if they're not an RDT in the lab, then we also need it co-signed by the RDT in the lab. So now today you're here at portfolio submission with evidence of competencies, which Tabasum and Karn are going to go through with you. And once you've submitted this evidence and you click, hey, I believe that I have submitted everything I need to show you that I demonstrate all of these competencies and performance indicators, then subject matter experts, the evaluators who are trained to do this, will start reviewing the portfolio. So you want to be very clear in what you're submitting as your portfolio and where the evaluator can look for the competency within the evidence. And so once that is done, the evaluators will look at your documents, they'll conduct their evaluation, and then they will provide you with a report. And the report will, we get into that. But if you are substantially equivalent, like there isn't any concerns that you have any gaps in your evidence, then you will be eligible to apply and sit for the entry to practice exam. So although the pilot is free of charge because you are, going on this journey with us in order to make sure that we're developing the best tool for the prior learning assessment recognition. You're not paying anything for the credentialing, but at that point, when you apply for the exams, that's when you'll just pay for the exams. There is no application fee for the exams. You're just paying for the knowledge-based exam and then the performance-based exam. Now, if you've got some gaps, there's going to be some time for you to be able to submit that evidence, which we call like additional documentation in order to satisfy the evaluators. And listen, there may be opportunities for the evaluators to work with you to submit that evidence or explain it to you, or we'll determine whether we need some other RDTs who can be your mentors and help fill that void for you. Once you've passed the entry to practice exams, you're ready to go to your province of choice to apply for registration. So I think that I can stop there and now pass it back to Tabassum and Karin, who are the experts.
Thank you very much, Judy, for that overview and context. It framed why this work is so important. Now, let's move into the focus of today's session, which is step 3 of the PLAR pathway pilot, the competency-based assessment. Now, the competency-based assessment evaluates your knowledge, skills, and attitudes through the evidence you compile and submit in the form of a portfolio. You'll remember that your personal folders were shared with you in mid-September, and I have received confirmation that everyone has access. The folders are the same for everyone and contain 3 subfolders: a README folder that includes a README file with instructions, the applicant portfolio guide, and the evidence grid. Now, our assumption is that you've reviewed the guide and evidence grid in preparation for this webinar. The other 2 subfolders are portfolio evidence grid and supporting evidence. The first one is where you will complete and save your evidence grid. The supporting evidence subfolder is where you will upload the documents that support your evidence grid entries. By reading the guide, you will know how to use these folders and what is expected. Now let's go over the process in the next slide, just to give you an idea about the whole process. So this timeline shows the main steps you'll go through in step 3 of the PLAR pathway pilot. So please follow the numbers on the screen as I speak to each process. So starting with number 1, you've already reached this point. So this is the invitation to step 3 was sent between September 15 and September 30th. Along with that, you received access to your personal folder in CADTR's SharePoint. Number 2.1 refers to this webinar. This is where we are at now. And number 2.2, you should begin preparing your portfolio and collecting your evidence if you haven't already started. This work, of course, will continue over the next several months. Number 3, in November, we will have the first checkpoint. This is an early review to make sure everyone is on the right track, and it is an opportunity to ask questions, raise any issues, and get clarity. At this point, we are not sure how the checkpoint is going to look like, whether it will be a one-on-one or a group meeting, but we will let you know as soon as possible. Number 4, in February 2026, we will have the second checkpoint. This is to make sure everyone is on track to meet the portfolio submission deadline. Number 5, the deadline for all portfolios is March 15, 2026. A complete portfolio with all supporting evidence must be submitted on March 15 at the latest. This is a hard deadline. Anything submitted after will not be considered for review. Number 6, between April and June 2026, a trained RDT evaluators will be assigned to your file, and they will review your portfolio and the evidence you have provided. This will be a detailed process to evaluate your competencies against the National Essential Entry to Practice competencies, which reflect the educational standards of approved dental technology programs in Canada. Number 7, sometime in July or August, if not before. Once your portfolio is evaluated, you will receive your PLAR results, which will state one of three outcomes. And I will go over these three outcomes shortly. So to summarize, you have 6 months to prepare your portfolio and submit it. One checkpoint in November, a second one in February 2026, a hard submission deadline in mid-March, and then evaluation and results in summer. Remember, although we only have 2 checkpoints, we're always available to support you. So please send your questions to the email provided in the guide. Now that you've seen how the overall process works, let's look at what happens once your portfolio has been reviewed. So after the evaluation is complete, each applicant will receive a result report. This report will state one of the 3 outcomes you see on the screen. And Judy referred to that briefly earlier. If your result report indicates substantially equivalent, it means you've met the required education, training, and experience standard for an entry-level Canadian dental technologist or dental technician. In other words, your prior learning and experience, so your competencies, are significantly similar to what is taught in an approved dental technology program in Canada. CADTR will let you know what your next steps are. A non-equivalent minor gaps result report means the evaluator identified minor gaps in your prior learning and experience. CADTR will provide you with an opportunity to fill these gaps by a specific deadline. And as Judy noted, you may be able to provide additional information at that point. Again, CADTR will let you know what your next steps are. Finally, a non-equivalent major gaps results report means your prior learning and experience are significantly different from the minimal standards for an entry-level Canadian dental technologist, dental technician. Therefore, you will not be permitted to continue with the registration or licensure process. Again, CADTR will let you know what your options are. Knowing what the results outcomes mean gives you a clearer picture of what you're working toward. And now let's shift to the practical part, which is how to complete your portfolio and evidence grid. And this will be our main focus for the next 70 minutes. All right, so we have heard from several of you about how to complete the evidence grid. So we wanted to take a moment to show you a section of the grid in this slide and walk you through the process of completing it. First, the evidence grid is simply a tool to help you stay organized. Think of it like a map. You use it to show where your evidence belongs and how it connects to the specific competencies you need to demonstrate. So instead of submitting a pile of documents with no explanation, the grid helps you explain, here's my evidence, this is the competency it matches, this is why it shows my skills. On the other side, evaluators will also use this grid to help them quickly find the right piece of evidence and understand how it supports your knowledge and skills. So the clearer you are in the grid, the easier it will be for evaluators to see the strength of your portfolio. What you're seeing on the screen is just one small section of the grid, as you know. It shows a single domain, one of its components, and the descriptor for that component, a subcomponent, a competency, and competencies performance indicators. The full evidence grid, of course, is much larger. It covers 3 domains, 8 components, 30 subcomponents, 32 competencies, and their performance indicators. But don't let this overwhelm you. Remember, you don't need to fill in the whole evidence grid at once. You work through it step by step. And how should you do this? Begin with the domain. Read the component and its overall descriptor. Review the competency statement, which describes the overall skill or knowledge you need to demonstrate. Read the performance indicators related to that competency next. These indicators give specific measurable examples of how the competency is demonstrated in practice. Now, to better understand each performance indicator and what the evaluator assigned to your file will look for as evidence of meeting the performance indicator, refer to the key evidence criteria, which is located in Appendix A of your guide. PLAR, and it's called Appendix A PLAR Competency Framework. So the key evidence criteria defines each performance indicator. And as you review the competency and its performance indicators, start reflecting on your own learning and experiences. Think about what you learned, where you learned it, when and how you learned it, and to what extent you gained that knowledge and skill. Think about how you used it or you still use it. And remember, you have to indicate this information in your evidence grid. Now let's look at the columns dedicated to this how, what, where, and to what extent. So the origin of learning, which is the column you see right after the competency and the performance indicator, is directly related to the evidence that you intend to submit. For example, if you select conference, the evaluator will expect to see evidence related to the conference. The next column, labeled learning statement, is a short learning statement you'll write, which will link the origin of your learning. So in our example, the conference, with the evidence you are submitting. This will help the evaluator understand your evidence when they begin to review it. And finally, in the last column, labeled reference for supporting evidence, you'll list the supporting evidence you're submitting for this competency and include a clear description of the evidence, the exact file name and label you'll use when uploading it to your supporting evidence folder. If your file is large, remember we had an example in the guide. If your file is large, a note to let the evaluator know the specific pages, sections, or timestamps if you're submitting a video that are related to the competency that should be reviewed must be noted in this column. And finally, think about the types of evidence that you can provide to demonstrate the knowledge and skills described in the competency, the associated performance indicators, and key evidence criteria. Now let's look at the characteristics of valid, demonstrative, and clearly labeled evidence in the next slide together. So if you read the guide, you already know that you must provide the most comprehensive and relevant evidence you have for each competency. If you're missing some of the performance indicators or key evidence criteria, don't let that stop you from submitting. Instead, include what you can and focus on presenting your strongest evidence. So what are the characteristics of valid, demonstrative, and clearly labeled evidence? Valid evidence is sufficient, authentic, credible, and verifiable, relevant, current, and accessible. Sufficient because you need to give enough evidence so the evaluator feels confident you meet the competency. Typically, this means 2 to 4 pieces of the strongest evidence you have for each competency. You can use the same piece of evidence for more than one competency, but you must show clearly where it fits in the grid. Then authentic, credible, and verifiable, because the evidence must be your own work and it reflect your real experience or achievements. It should come from reliable sources, such as certificates, employer letters, or official documents. If needed, the evidence must be possible to check and confirm. Relevant. The evidence must directly connect to the competency you're trying to show. It should be clear how it proves your knowledge or skills in that area. And current, because the evidence must show your recent and up-to-date knowledge and skills. and it should reflect today's professional standards and practices. And finally, valid evidence is accessible. Evaluators must be able to open and review your files easily. You must use common formats like PDF, Word, JPEG, or MP4 under 100 megabytes, and make sure your files are labeled and readable and good quality, because if the evaluator cannot access your or understand your evidence, it may not be counted. Then evidence must be demonstrative. So in addition to being valid, your evidence also needs to be demonstrative. That means it should clearly show that you not only know the information, but that you can apply it at the level described in the competency. Once the evaluator confirms your evidence is valid, they will look at how well your evidence demonstrates your knowledge and skills for that competency. They'll then assign a score using a 5-point rating scale, and we had included information about how they will go by doing that. So the clearer and better organized your evidence is, the easier it will be for the evaluator to see what you know and can do, and that helps make your assessment faster and more accurate. If things are disorganized or unclear, it could slow down the process or even affect your scores. Then clearly labeled. Your evidence must be clearly labeled. You must name your evidence exactly the same as you noted in the evidence grid. The evaluator will only look for the supporting evidence name you included in the evidence grid. Also remember, you do not need to submit a separate piece of evidence for every individual performance indicator and or key evidence criteria. Instead, your evidence should collectively demonstrate that you've met the performance indicators as guided by the key evidence criteria within each competency. Now that we've reviewed what makes your evidence valid and clearly labeled and demonstrative, let's take a look at the different types of evidence you can include in your portfolio. This list shows examples of the kind of evidence you can include in your portfolio. There are quite a few listed here, but remember, these are just examples. You're not expected to include every type, and you can also include other evidence not listed if it is valid and demonstrative. The key point is to choose the best pieces of evidence, ones that clearly show your knowledge and skills for the specific competency you're being assessed on. I will not go through each example since you've seen them in the guide, but I will highlight one type of evidence that applicants sometimes find confusing, which is reflective narratives or self-directed learning. A reflective narrative isn't just a story about what you did. It should show your thought process, what you learned, and how you applied that learning in practice. For example, you might describe a situation, what decisions you made, what you learned from it, and how that learning influenced your future work. Remember, a strong evidence connects your experience directly to the competency you're being assessed on. Before we move on, I'd like to highlight 3 important reminders and 1 important note. You have seen all but one of these already in the guide, but it's worth reviewing them because they're critical when you're putting your portfolio together. Please make sure you have your guide handy as you work through your portfolio. So the first 2 reminders explain what evaluators will be looking for and what could affect your results if not followed carefully. 1 reminder for those intending to register as a dental technician or DT in Alberta only. And finally, new information about the attestation letter. Okay, so the first point is about the authenticity of the submitted evidence. Note that evaluators will use their professional judgment to confirm that the evidence you've submitted is genuinely your own work and accurately reflects your knowledge and skills. If anything appears inauthentic, misleading, or not credible, including any AI-generated content, it will be scored as no evidence, and your portfolio could be rejected. This note is placed in a gray text box labeled Important to in the guide. The second point relates to domain C, specialized technical expertise. For those competencies, your evidence needs to show both how you learned the skill or knowledge and how you applied it in practice. So for example, coursework or workshops alone aren't enough. You need to show real hands-on application through cases, projects, or work samples. This note is also placed in a gray text box labeled Important 3 in the guide. The third bullet is addressed to Alberta applicants. If you intend to register as a dental technician or DT with the College of Dental Technologists of Alberta, or CDTA, you must complete the evidence grid for all competencies in domain A and B, so components 1 to 4. You may then identify the specific discipline or disciplines for which you're seeking an evaluation and complete the evidence grid for those competencies only. You must complete the competencies for at least one discipline. You must also contact CDTA to understand the specific requirements for registration as a DT and to confirm if PLAR pathway is an appropriate option for you. Finally, we have one important update about the attestation letter in your guide. If your attester, that is the person confirming your competency or competencies, such as your supervisor or manager, is not a registered dental technologist or a registered dental technician, or an RDT in short, then an RDT must co-sign the attestation letter. The guidelines and the template for this letter have been updated in the guide, specifically in Appendix C, and the revised version of the guide is already posted to your personal folders. If you have already printed your copy, please print pages 33 and 34. So pages 33 and 34 from the updated guide and replace those pages in your printed version. So those are the key notes to keep in mind as you gather and select your evidence. Now, let's look at how to bring it all together in the evidence grid and how to record your learning, link it to the competency, and organize your supporting evidence. We will show you an example to walk you through the process. Here's an example of how someone who hasn't taken a formal course may still show this competency. So this, as you can see, is about domain A, subcomponent 1.2, and competency 1.1.2, which is apply knowledge of oral structure, tooth morphology, and oral pathology to dental technology. There are 6 performance indicators associated with this competency. The applicant, in this case, has reviewed all of these and the key evidence criteria in Appendix A, and then completed this section of the grid. I must emphasize that this is just an example. It's just an example. So you can see that the learning comes from different sources. So a workshop, employment position, or on-the-job experience, and self-directed study been checked off. The key, though, is that the evidence clearly has to connect to the competency and must demonstrate both knowledge and application. And not every applicant will cover every key evidence criteria, but evaluators are looking for enough strong relevant evidence to confirm that the applicant meets the competency as a whole. So in this example, the applicant submitted 5 pieces of evidence. Normally, CADTR asks for a maximum of 4 per competency. In this case, the applicant felt it was absolutely necessary to include all 5. The workshop certificate, the agenda for the workshop outlining the session, the self-directed learning from a reference book, and a reflective note from their self-study. Because together they tell the story and clearly show both knowledge and application. So the bottom line is, yes, you can go slightly over the limit if it's truly needed, but you should be very confident that each piece of evidence you're submitting is essential and not repetitive. And more importantly, what you should avoid is uploading too many documents and hoping that one of them fits, because that just makes the evaluation harder and can weaken your portfolio. So your job is really to carefully choose the strongest, most relevant evidence, do a critical review of what you plan to include, and only add an extra one if it is absolutely necessary to give the complete picture. Another important note, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is just an example. We don't know if this is an acceptable learning statement, acceptable evidence or not. The evaluator who would review this will make that decision after review of the grid and the evidence submitted. Now that you've seen an example of how a competency might be completed in the evidence grid, let's talk about how you can approach yours. All right, so remember, as consultant, we can guide you on how to complete the grid, where to record the information, how to describe your learning, and how to organize your evidence. But we're not subject matter experts in dental technology, so we can't tell you what specific evidence to include in the sections of the grid. That part has to come from your own experience and judgment. Also, remember, we've strongly recommended that you review your competencies and portfolio evidence with a mentor, colleague, or a supervisor before submitting the final version. So to help you think through this, we have added screenshots in the next few slides from domain B and C of the grid. So we will first take a look at the competency, the associated performance indicators, as well as key evidence criteria, and we'll provide some really high-level guidance. So let's review this competency together. This, as you can see, is in domain B, safe and professional practice, component 4, professional practice, subcomponent 4.1, which is communication and collaboration, and competency 4.1.1, which is use effective communication skills. So please take a moment to read the single performance indicator for this competency first. And then I am going to move to the next slide and ask you to read the key evidence criteria for this performance indicator. Now I'm going to go back to the previous slide. So at a high level, for this competency, evidence might include de-identified emails or a report you've written that shows professional communication, etc. Now, let's make this a bit interactive. So keeping the competency in mind, I'd like to ask you to think about 2 questions. Number 1, how have you gained this knowledge or skill? So was it through work, through training, mentorship, self-study, a conference you attended, and so on? And number 2, how could you demonstrate it using the evidence from your own experience? So please unmute your mic, and we would like to hear some examples. And remember, there are no right or wrong answers. This is just to help you start connecting your experience with the competency and the types of evidence you might use. And the first thing that, and we've told you from the beginning, the first thing you need to do is to review the guide, the competency. In this case, use effective communication skills. That's the competency the evaluator will be looking for. Look at the performance indicator. They need you to demonstrate that you can use appropriate dental terminology in communications with the healthcare team. We've given you the key evidence criteria. You're going to go over that list and really familiarize yourself with what is it that the evaluator wants to see. Then you ask yourself those questions. Did I learn this? Yes. Based on what you all said, you've learned this, you have this skill. Now, how can I prove it? Okay, this evidence, I do have it, but I can't share it because it's digital. Okay, what else I can use? And all the other evidence that we've listed. So that's how you have to approach this step by step to come to the point that, okay, what is the best evidence, best 2 or 3 evidence that I can submit that meets this requirement. And then complete the grid and move to the next section of the grid. So domain C, remember, this is about specialized technical expertise. This is specific to component 7, discipline 3, which is about dentures, also described as removable full prosthetics. And then the subcomponent is 7.1, analyze. And the competency specific to that subcomponent is analyze the healthcare practitioner's prescription and patient's information to plan the design and material selection for the fabrication of the dental prosthesis and or appliance. Again, please take a little bit of time to read through these performance indicators. Then I will move to the next slide where you can see the key evidence criteria. Okay, let's go back to the previous slide. Look at the grid. Again, you're asking yourself the same questions as we did with the other competency. So did I learn this? Do I have this skill? Where, how, when, to what extent I learned this? And if the answer is yes, I have, then what is the evidence that I can submit for the evaluator and be successful? So the origin of learning, we're going to decide which of these is the best, and then write down your learning statement and then your references, your supporting evidence. So again, at a very high level, what is this competency all about? So they're asking for your ability to review a healthcare practitioner's prescription, understand those clinical requirements, then make decisions about the design and the materials you'll use to fabricate a prosthesis or appliance. So remember also that for this domain, it is critical to include both the theoretical and the practical sides of your learning. So it's not just enough to show that you understand materials. Your evidence must also show you have applied that knowledge in your actual work. So keeping, again, the competency in mind, start thinking about the learning sources. Where did you gain this? How, do you have the knowledge to do this kind of analysis? Was it during your training, during your experience, your work with, oral health professionals, or maybe you were troubleshooting cases in your lab? So think about those. And then, did I apply this knowledge? How did I apply it? When did I apply? Where did I apply it? Those questions. And then only then you can think about, okay, what is an evidence, solid evidence that I can submit to demonstrate this, both the knowledge and the application of it. Let's go over some key takeaways. So again, and we've emphasized this throughout, so choose valid demonstrative evidence that clearly shows what you know and you can do. Please keep everything organized and relevant to each competency. Select your best 2 to 4 pieces, as Karin noted, 2 to 4 pieces of evidence for each competency, and add more if truly necessary, right? So don't send 10, 20 pieces of evidence. We need your strongest evidence, and you really need to go through this, review it, and make a decision. Critical review of your evidence is really essential. For domain C, remember you have to show both knowledge and hands-on application. Please use your portfolio guide as your main source of reference. Have it handy when you're completing your portfolio. Remember, your first checkpoint is in mid-November. with, of course, support available throughout. A reminder to Alberta applicants again, please contact CDTA to just confirm the registration requirements and whether this pathway is applicable and suitable for you. And then finally, the webinar recording will be shared within the next week or so with all participants, including those who could not attend live. This brings us to the end of the webinar. So thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today and for your participation, especially those who shared examples and asked questions. We hope that this session helped clarify how to organize and present your evidence in a way that best reflects your knowledge and skills. And remember, again, your portfolio guide is your main reference. Review that before you start completing the grid. Upload your evidence, as Karen said, when you can. But when you tell us, I'm ready for evaluation, that's it. Then you cannot go back, add, edit, change. So it will be, at that point, it will be submitted to the evaluator. I think I'll stop here, Judy, if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, no, that was terrific. Thank you, Tabasum and Karn. And I want to thank all of you as PLAR applicants. I know how dedicated you are. The fact that you just completed the eligibility steps was truly just a signal of your dedication. And you're doing something wonderful for this profession. This PLAR initiative, I would say, is so unique, what this profession has undertaken. And you are being leaders, like you're being thought leaders in a really great sense of the word, and thought-provoking, because I think you're setting an amazing bar for other health regulators to look and to follow your lead. So I applaud you, I thank you, and I wish you all the best in your journey. Please do reach out. We are here to help you. If there's any other questions that may help other applicants, don't be afraid, because the purpose of this was so that by sharing your questions, everybody else gets to understand, what concerns what concerns you might have. So always share that. Again, thank you all very much for attending.